This is Real Conversations with Anita, a mental health podcast brought to you by Iltizam by Equinus and MIASA Malaysia.
On that expectation. Don't
Right.
hold on to it so much so that it kills yourself.
Parents can be wrong. I mean, it's tough to even say that again. Because we have this overarching idea that kids, you can't say that.
Right.
You can't even have the idea that parents can be wrong. Anything parents do, parents say, you just say yes, yes, follow. Otherwise, you are now deemed to be anak durhaka.
Since I was young, I had to self-discipline myself. Since I started my whole career in the industry at the age of 6, and then I had to grow up understanding how it is to be disciplined.
Assalamualaikum and a very good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Real Conversations with Anita, a mental health podcast brought to you by Iltizam by Equinus and MIASA Malaysia. And this week we have a special episode just for all of you. We are with Dr. Beth Nolan, who is the Director of Research and Policy, speaker mentor for Positive Approach to Dementia Care. Welcome, Dr. Beth. How are you?
Thank you for having me, or I should say, it's evening. Selamat malam.
Evening, yes.
Yes.
This is evening. Yes, selamat malam. Okay, or selamat petang.
Selamat petang.
Petang, yes.
That's
Selamat
good
malam
for me.
is more like good
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, we're not there
Selamat-
yet.
We're not there yet. We'll be there soon. Dr. Beth, all the way from Michigan, United States of America. How was your flight coming here?
It was good. Actually, we had an easier flight because we came through Australia.
Oh,
So that was a
awesome.
little bit easier.
Right. So
yeah.
it took about how long?
The hours, my hippocampus, my ability to tell wayfinding and time passage,
Don't know.
I can't tell you. I
7 hours?
think
8?
one of the flights, I think it was 9.
9 hours?
Yeah,
Okay,
it
9
was a
hours.
smaller plane.
Yeah. So it took longer.
I think maybe, yeah, actually.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So Dr. Beth, we will be talking about on the topic of from caregiver to care partner in
Yes.
dementia care. So that way you will have an opportunity to educate us on what does care partner mean in the context of dementia. But before that, before we dive into our discussion, if you can, please give our listeners and viewers a background of yourself and what have you been up to lately?
What I've been up to lately
Yeah.
is my brain is full of learning.
Yes, we love that.
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
We haven't had a chance to travel more frequently now that COVID is different.
Yes.
It's weird to say over, but yeah, that's not really a thing. And really try to help expand the idea that people who are living with dementia, one of 100 to 120 different forms, types, and causes of brain change,
Yeah.
that there's a possibility that life can be had, and that no matter where you are from cradle to grave,
Yeah.
you have the opportunity to find purpose and meaning in life
Definitely.
and actually find moments of joy and moments of contentment.
Yeah.
But it's going to take those of us around us, as well as those of us who are living with dementia, to be willing to learn and try new things.
Yes. Everyone can enjoy quality of life.
Yes.
And at some point in our life, we might need support.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
that's the part when people say, "Oh, it's so good of you to be in dementia." It's a very uncomfortable tone for me to hear because I got to say, it's honestly it's selfish.
Yeah.
It's not just the possibility that any one of us could develop dementia, but it's also the fact that by supporting others and finding purpose and meaning in my life, I'm also supporting my own brain health.
It is.
So maybe there's a selfish aspect to it.
Well, awesome, Dr. Beth. Now, a little bit about dementia. Maybe, when it comes to Malaysia, there has been a little bit of progress when it comes to awareness on dementia. But generally, people don't really know what it means. And sometimes people think dementia is a condition, is an illness. People don't understand, Alzheimer's and all the works. So maybe educate us a little bit. What does dementia mean, and what is the different types of it? How does it work? What happens to your brain?
Yeah, well, Malaysia should not feel less than.
Okay.
The little secret I'll give your listeners is that no matter whom I'm talking to, whether it's providers, physicians at a hospital,
Right.
First responders, police and rescue, nursing staff, there's always an awareness that is growing in the room about what dementia is.
Yeah.
So picture the word cancer, if you will, something that people have a little bit more exposure to, and it's gotten a lot more education in the world.
Right.
If you put the word cancer on an umbrella, all the different forms, types, and causes of cancer that you could get, as well as maybe even more than one type of cancer,
Right.
fall under that umbrella.
Right.
It's simply a collection of symptoms. It's a
Right.
category or a syndrome. And to be classified as a type of cancer, it has to meet certain criteria.
Right.
That's what makes it a syndrome. Same thing with dementia. Dementia is not a diagnosis.
Right.
Dementia is simply a syndrome. It's a collection of different diseases
Right.
that have four main components.
Okay.
So one, to be qualified as a dementia, at least two parts of the brain are dying at any given time, and sometimes more.
Okay.
First part. The second part of that is that, well, we're talking about a chronic disease. It's not going to go away.
Right.
It's not, and that's the third one. It's not something that we can actually stop. We can change the speed sometimes. We can alter the way that our brain is changing,
You can delay it.
but it's progressive
Okay.
by definition.
Okay.
And then the last one is a really hard one for people to hear.
Okay.
But I think it's probably the most important because it can actually be the most empowering.
Okay.
Is that all forms and types and causes of dementia are terminal illnesses. And I think that that deserves a pause, because if you're someone who dementia has entered your life and you're listening to this, and it's the first time you've been told this truth, it takes a breath to recognize that if you or someone you love has been diagnosed with dementia, that they do have a terminal illness. But I don't know anybody on this planet that's going to be able to leave anything other than feet first. There's all of us, for any of us, there's going to be a reason or some disease or some accident that causes our death. This just happens to be perhaps the one for you or a loved one. The other side of that may be the opportunity that it gives us.
It does.
If it is a terminal illness,
Right.
you have a knowledge and a choice that could be powerful.
Yes.
How do you want to live? So one of our wonderful informed physicians was doing that horrific moment where you have to give somebody that ultimate truth that they have a terminal illness and it's one form, type, cause of dementia. And so this family said, "What do I do now, doc? What do I do? What am I supposed to do?" And this informed physician said, "Well, go live your life. What do you want to do? Do you want to travel? Do you want to work? Do you want to be an advocate? Do you want to love your grandchildren? What do you want to do?" And so the possibility in dementia, that's what we're here for.
That's powerful, though. I mean, we talk about purpose and meaning all the time, but when you word it that way, then you see that opportunity that you can live your life fully.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of waiting, delaying, oh, I can do that tomorrow. I can travel next year. But with that opportunity, like what you just said, we live life to the maximum.
No one would ever tell a person living with
Exactly.
cancer to say, you need to go and be in your bed, get your life in order.
Right.
I mean, that would be absurd.
Right.
We have that opportunity with dementia.
Okay, very good. Dr. Beth, now, earlier we spoke about, your experiences, and you said before you came into, working with Dementia Care, you were in mental health.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit more. How did you come to working in mental health? How did this interest come about?
I was trying to think about that going into a podcast, knowing there'd be a personal side. I was trying to think, what were some of those seminal things
Right.
that sort of, and I would say probably the one thing that sticks out was an experience I had with my mother in the grocery store. And I was probably about 10 or so old enough to recognize the difference between money and a welfare type voucher.
Okay.
And in my family, we were a working class family. My father had an amazing job. My mother was able to spend time with us, but then also worked. We were not rich, but we were so not poor at all. We had a wonderful middle class opportunities. But my parents didn't ever buy things like cakes at a cake store.
Okay.
You wouldn't make that at home because it was so much cheaper. The pizza that we'd make pizza at home, it was a rare treat to have pizza that we would. So my parents were smart. Right. Homemade. And there was a man in front of us who was buying cupcakes.
Okay.
And I saw him put down a voucher, a food voucher. And I at least was raised enough, and thank goodness for my poor mother, that I did not at that moment blurt out, why is he using a voucher for cupcakes? So I waited until we got in the car, and I was really kind of like, kind of indignant, as any 10-year-old can be when they know the truth. And I said to my mom, I said, why, if he has on food stamps, why is it that he's buying something so expensive as cupcakes? And my mother looked at me very sternly, and she said, how do you know anything about him? How do you know if he has a working stove in his house? How do you know if his apartment even has any of the things to make that? How do you know if this is maybe the most important birthday for his daughter?
Maybe it's his birthday.
And maybe he is spending his money poorly.
Right.
And he has a right to do that. And that for me was a seminal place in which I thought, that's it.
It's an awesome story.
Yeah. Kind of set forth the idea of, as her teachings were, that each person has value and meaning, and I don't have a right to choose for others,
Right.
but I do have an obligation to come alongside and support.
So this was at 10 years old.
Yeah.
And then that interest came in.
Yeah, I started working in autism, actually.
Oh, you started with autism.
Started with autism, and so that interest in how the brain works and how brains work differently, but then also that expanding that notion from a 10-year-old's idea to everything a person does, any organism on this planet, they do things with purpose and meaning. They're doing something in reaction or response to something that they experience.
Right.
And how we help support an individual to get their needs met when their abilities to meet those needs are changing,
Right.
and maybe causing them or others more distress, that's where the partnership comes in.
Right.
And that's where I have to, with permission, can come alongside. So that idea of helping support individuals with different brains, and that they work differently than mine.
Right.
I've even expanded this idea that maybe neurotypical and neurodivergent isn't necessarily even, maybe it's lending us more to an us versus them mentality as well, but a brain that when I interact with somebody, I've got to figure out how we interact well together. So from there, I started working more and more with people with intellectual disabilities and also had mental illnesses.
I see. Okay. So what would you say about, because you said you don't come from a rich family, but not a poor family.
No.
Did you have any challenges that you went through as a child or growing up during your teen years? I mean, what experiences shaped you to who you are today? Because there's so much light in you. Like when I speak to you, there's so much empathy, there's so much gratitude. Where did it stem from?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because I guess interacting with more and more people in the world, I don't really look back and feel like I had something that necessarily, except for just I happened to get lucky in the birth lotto and have stable, healthy parents and a good upbringing. I sat around a table one time with dozens and dozens of people, and we were all working together to help decrease child violence.
Okay.
So it was an initiative with first responders, mental health workers, and the faith-based community to help divert kids or keep them from, 10, 12-year-old boys from entering into gangs, and how we keep kids alive, right? So a beautiful, basic life notion. And it became this amen sort of talk where each person was going around and telling them what brought to the table. And my very young project coordinator was sitting next to me, and I realized as people are going, saying these stories, like I held my grandmother's dying last breath as she was shot on my front porch, and I was thinking, I got nothing. I have no right to be here. And worse yet, my 22-year-old project coordinator sitting next to me, and the introduce yourself and tell why you're here is coming around to her. And I can only say I had wished I would be as eloquent as this 22-year-old, because her answer when it came down to her, she said, "Hi, my name is Alex Blanford," and I will say her name because she received so much kudos in my book for this. She said, had similar upbringing to me. she said, well, once, the reason I'm here is once when I was a little girl, and I was walking home from school, and these boys were chasing me, and they were bullying me, and I fell and I broke my baguette.
Okay.
And there was a beat around the table of all these people who just bared their souls with like the worst moment of their life. And she goes, I have no right to be here. I've got nothing. And at that moment, I was like, what she said.
Yes.
I don't. But I guess maybe.
But that's such a good answer, though.
Isn't it the best answer?
Yes.
Yeah, at that point, I was like, she brought levity to the moment. Everyone laughed, and she was welcomed in to be the person that, I guess, over time, I've been taught to listen, and I still say that with hesitancy because I also enjoy talking.
Yeah.
So I keep learning.
Okay, good. Well, knowledge is transformative, right?
It is.
And that's what we do. We learn. Like today, we're learning from you.
Yes.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Thank you so much. Dr. Beth, I wanted to ask, because I've heard you say this repeatedly, you keep on saying permission. Because a lot of times in our work, we say consent.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for this? I just wanted to, pull that one.
Consent is very complex to me.
Okay.
Consent, to me, and I put on my researcher hat, my old professor hat.
Okay.
And I think about, is the person informed and has a full understanding of the situation?
Okay.
And for some of the folks that I interact with, towards the end of the disease process, there's very little sometimes spoken language. There's so this idea that I can truly know what you understand to give consent. I will have to check in moment to moment to see if consent in that moment is given. And the word that seems to fit better is permission. That each moment of our touch, it is in my power to either, especially with someone who's physically at that point so much more vulnerable than I am, that I don't have any right to do anything to them ever, that I have to do it with you. And that permission can be gained not just through words and through eyes, but through the finite little motions and hints that our brains and our bodies give another human being when we are connected.
Right.
So yes, I love the idea of consent. It's going to be hard for me to, and especially with TIPA's program, to necessarily help others who are growing in their knowledge of how you can get permission from a person who can't speak any words. But what we can do is help people feel those things and see those things they may be missing.
Right.
So that's our permission piece.
Okay, awesome. Dr. Beth, we have about 2 minutes before we end the first segment. I wanted to ask you if you could share maybe some inspiring stories of either people living with dementia or care partners. Maybe one or two that maybe is most memorable or maybe touched you deeply to the core.
There's a lot. Some of my best friends are living with dementia, and the grief and the work that they did, and sometimes even the depression that they had to overcome to then move to a place to live life again is amazing. So there's one woman we work with who was she's now retired neuropsychologist. And there's a TV program in the States, like those crime shows, where they try to find the criminals. And she was actually a consultant on that show. She had this amazing career, and she describes how in the profession that she's in, our degrees, our titles are our identities. Then when she herself figured out that she had early onset Alzheimer's, so her diagnosis was specifically Alzheimer's, that she lost that immediately. And she had to go through the process not only to battle a health system to get an actual full diagnosis, but she lost her job, she lost her identity. And the thing she describes is that from day 1 to day 2, across 24 hours when she was given the diagnosis, she fell into a world where she was less than. And she describes a moment when she said, I expected to lose my job, and I did expect to lose my income, my identity. I didn't expect in these diseases to lose my humanity. And so what she's been able to rebuild is a whole new identity, even with a brain that is dying. And that to me with so many of my other friends, is just so powerful. And what is powerful, with less and less tissue in the brain, it shows me really how many opportunities there are.
So powerful, awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Beth, for sharing that.
Thank you.
We want to hear more from you, more of the inspiring stories, but we will have to take a short break, and we will be right back in Real Conversations with Anita. So from caregiver to care partner. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a funny language change, isn't it?
It is.
So in PAC, while we're also working with diseases that language changes,
Right.
we recognize the power of language.
It is. It's powerful.
Oh, it is. And
Yeah.
and every different language we move into, it's like, wow, we take a big pause, because care partner is just an
Mhm.
example of that.
Right.
So caregiver is a word we use in the United States as well.
Right.
And even the ugly one that shows up every once in a while is caretaker.
Caretaker.
Which in caretaker in the English language in the US also
Mhm.
means somebody who takes the body away.
Okay.
So that one's really uncomfortable,
Right.
especially when we're working with people with terminal illnesses.
Right.
The caregiver
Mhm.
has this idea that really we feel lends this idea that I am more than. I am obligated to take what I know
Mhm.
that's more than you and to give it to you, and therefore you are better.
Right.
And that's not a place of comfort, because we know that's not how brains work.
Right.
So care partner is a phrase, and I actually don't know. I'd be curious to know if your listeners, somebody's going to look it up and maybe put in the comments
Right.
on where it came from.
Mhm.
I don't know if we can claim it at Deepest Knows Positive Approach to
I
Care.
see.
It is something that we use.
Okay. So it's not coined anywhere.
I don't know if it's going anywhere. And I wish if Tipa was here, she might even have the answer to this one.
Mhm.
But care partner is this
Right.
idea that I can only in this relationship, and should only, provide 50%. Everything that we do has to move to this place of care partnering.
Right. So it's more of we meet halfway.
We meet halfway.
Okay.
That the things that I do from an occupational approach,
Right.
I can augment those things that are no longer here,
Mm-hmm.
that are missing,
Right.
and come alongside you.
Mm-hmm.
So the phrase that might be helpful for people to think about is this idea that I no longer have the right to do to you,
Mm-hmm.
but I can do with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we circle back to the word permission.
Right.
But it becomes really difficult. And if anybody's out there as a caregiver,
Right.
thinking, no, I'm a caregiver. I give care to my mother. And it can be a beautiful thing. What we hope people move to, and maybe after this segment they can get curious, is this idea that until the day I die,
Mm-hmm.
I am who I am.
Yeah.
I am who I always was.
Yes.
But yes, I am different.
Mm-hmm.
But the essence of that is I am who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Until I draw this last breath on this earth, I have an opinion. I have likes and I have dislikes. Your ability to figure out what I am trying to express has got to change.
Yeah.
If we're going to be able to do this together.
Mm-hmm.
So case in point, and a very small one, is actually quite personal.
Okay.
So I watched my husband become truly a care partner, but even more so, he became a care partner with his sister, who was primary
Mm-hmm.
with their father.
Okay.
And we moved back home, not just for career and opportunities to get care partnering with my parents and for my kid, but
Mm-hmm.
also to then move into a care partnering role with his sister.
Okay.
So during the dying process, that time when active dying was happening for my father-in-law, he was very distressed. We knew his pain was managed. We had checked everything out. We thought he was physically comfortable as he could be. We knew he wasn't hungry. We knew we had addressed thirst. We'd started to eliminate all these things.
Right.
But it was very clear that he was uncomfortable. He was moving and sound, and he had his eyes closed at this point in the process. But we knew something was up. And everything I'd learned, I was like, we are going to solve this. I was determined, and I knew enough to figure this out, and we were not stopping. It was just
solve this,
right? I knew. Therein comes the humility piece that I had lacking in that moment. And so luckily,
Mm-hmm.
I spoke out loud
Yeah.
just for learning styles and said, there's gotta be something we're missing. What are we missing? What's changed? What's different?
Right.
Throwing those questions out almost selfishly to myself because I could solve this. And my husband, who of course knows his father more than I do, he latched onto that last question, what's different? And he just turned and looked to his father, which is the first way, vision, the first way we take in data. That's the primary way.
Right.
And he looked at his dad and said, well, he's not wearing his glasses. Now, my father-in-law had these really heavy 1960s horn-rimmed, thick bottle glasses that my guess is he had as a child.
Right.
And they really hadn't changed since the 60s. They're heavy. And I thought, well, why not? We've tried everything else.
Right.
So the man who, mind you, like I said, had not opened his eyes in at least 48 hours, if not longer at this point, I was like, give it a try. So my husband picked up his glasses. And,
put it on?
Well, actually, even more so. He touched his hand, said his name, touched his hand. And even though my father wasn't moving or made the motions to take my husband's hand, he gave him that feedback, got permission to move his hand up towards his own face.
Right.
And Tim did the skillful part of putting the glasses on his face. And at that moment, he sighed. My father-in-law sighed and settled.
Of relief, right?
True relief. Like, that's what I was looking for. Yeah. I couldn't find him anywhere.
That humbled you.
It humbled me in so many ways. At that point, it was just relief. But in truth, it was, if I am truly to be a care partner, I have to be able to recognize those things that I may not know about you. And be humble enough to look up and look out, which takes effort as I'm so hyper-focused on him. I want to solve it. At that moment, I was just a caregiver. I was trying to give what I knew and impose it on him. And by throwing out a question, my husband was able to be more curious than I was and say, well, what is missing? And by just looking at his glasses.
Awesome. It's such a beautiful story. Thank you, Beth, for sharing that. Now, you spoke about Keep Us Knows approach quite a bit earlier on. Can you share with us what does it mean by the Keep Us Knows approach? And maybe share a little bit more about misconceptions when it comes to people living with dementia.
Yeah, so Teepa is the reason I'm here. And I always joke about the fact that my entire brain is simply like, her IP. Not sure what I would do without it. I'm going to have to license my head or something. Right. But Teepa Snow is her name. And it is a funny name. It was a name that was given to her by a young man who had an intellectual disability and couldn't pronounce her name as Tina.
Tina!
And it was Teepa.
Teepa, right.
And it stuck, and she eventually changed her name legally to Teepa.
Oh my God, that just gave me goosebumps.
So even early on, and she was young, I think teens or preteen at this point, and volunteering in a day program.
Okay.
And so she's been Teepa her whole life.
Okay.
But yes, it is a strange name. So Teepa Snow it's very unique. She is a real person who then worked in brain injury and became an occupational therapist.
Right.
And she figured out very early on, it was through that occupational approach, it's this idea where I can augment that which is missing.
Yeah.
But that only to that point where then you take it from there. And so she watched and very astutely figured out that what people were trying to do as caregivers wasn't working for anybody.
Yeah.
So over time, she recognized the way in which that she could feel or sense how someone gave permission to help them meet their unmet needs, no matter what their functioning level.
Right.
But what I think she also is very clear about is that in doing so, she met her needs too.
Yeah.
And it moved away from this idea that providers, adult children, spouses, partners, anyone has the right to give care. That in fact, especially all adults.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of times what we're dealing with in dementia. Most people are adults when they get dementia or some form of dementia, that they are an adult and they have a right to choose. And they even, believe it or not, have a right to make really bad decisions. How many of us have made bad decisions in our life? And, well, maybe our friends and loved ones said, but I had a right to make those decisions. And I had the power to do it. No one took that from me. So in her approach, she has taken 40 years to operationalize all those ways in which the brain and the body speak to each other and show and demonstrate how we're communicating what you're allowed to do to me.
Right.
And when we violate that, we're asking and requesting the other person, demanding that other person to change and to adapt to me. So if I stood you to here and started speaking very, very loudly, you might give me subtle cues that are telling me I'm a bit loud.
Right.
What we do this is by matching.
Oh, okay.
So the volume that you're using, being the person here that I felt had more experience, I looked to you and I matched socially that volume, figuring it might work for others.
Right.
And we do this the same way, let's say in a crowded bazaar.
Right.
We might speak a little louder, but the minute we step away from the noise, we're going to speak quieter. We're going to take cues from the world around us, take cues from the person in front of us, and we begin to match. And we do this over time with training from our parents, from feedback we get, from getting our needs met by matching. Well, in the case of brain change, my ability to read those cues and respond to them, as well as that how I take in data, begins to change.
Right.
And in Tipa's approach, she's helping care providers all over the world, first responders, family members, and people living with dementia, taking that step-by-step process and figuring out how it is we interact.
Right.
So I'll give you a real concrete example. If you can, think for a moment about your visual field. So if you're driving and listening to this, you can do this, but please still keep your eyes on the road. But I want you to notice for a moment how far out in your peripheral vision, the size of your vision, that you can actually see things. That in fact, as you move out to that peripheral space, it's not so much the details you see, but rather lights, movement, or color.
Right.
It's our zone of safety.
Right.
But as my brain ages, no disease-based process at all. As my brain ages, my brain's ability to take in the world around me begins to change.
Right.
And it's not that I can see less, per se. My eyes may or may not change as a physical structure, but my brain's ability to process that much data begins to change. So at the age of 25, I could actually put my arms out to the side and move my fingers and wiggle them as I stood there in a big wide-armed T and actually see my fingers moving. But as a 50-year-old, I actually have to bring my fingers forward just a little bit farther to see them moving on the edge of my peripheral vision.
Right.
And in those days when I'm exhausted, when I haven't eaten well, or I haven't slept well, or I'm incredibly stressed, that field of vision actually narrows even more. Now enter in the world of aging, specifically at 75, still no dementia. It's about a 45-degree angle.
Okay.
Maybe about shoulder width apart, a little bit wider than that. To the point where if you actually took your hands and flat, made them like big high fives, put your thumbs on your cheeks so you actually are looking through almost like a portal of a ship. That's the field of view for someone about 75 years old.
Okay.
In dementia, now if you take your hands and make them in two round C's, so open hands, and put them around your eyes so you're looking actually through a tunnel vision or a scuba mask, that's the field of vision early on in the disease.
Okay.
Or us on a very, very stressed moment.
Right.
Or one of hyperfocus.
Right.
I'm reading something intently.
Right.
I might miss something on the corner of my eye.
Right.
But I don't have a choice in dementia. I can't take a deep breath, look up and look out and notice more when dementia enters the picture. So by the time maybe 2 out of 10 people in the West and in the US and some other countries are actually just getting a diagnosis, 2 out of 10. If you make 2 circles with your hands and put them over your eyes, my world now becomes binocular vision.
Right.
And I can really only see about one thing at a time. I can either look across to you and see your face, or I can look down on the table and see my phone.
Right.
But that I can only do one at a time.
Right.
And if our field of vision is that way, what does that notice? What do you notice when you see the world around you? How much can you actually see? I can either have social vision or I can have task vision, but I have to choose. And in care partnering, by knowing that information, how do you see this happening in the world around you? When you see someone who's living with dementia, how often do you startle them? How much more jumpy is mom? When I come into the room, when I thought she heard me coming. I maybe even said her name. But in fact, I walk up to her from her side. And, oh, geez, you're just scared the daylights out of me. I didn't even see you there. Just you talk a little bit louder when you come in the room. At least say something.
Right.
I react.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't mean to, but you startled me.
Right.
So as a care partner,
Mm-hmm.
knowing this information, knowing the way that vision, just one sense, affects my ability to interact with the world, what might that do for you as a care partner? Where might you want to approach mom? Because you didn't want to startle her either, because you sure didn't want to get her wrath.
Right.
And then as the disease advances, how other things work in the brain and the body. If I was coming in to help you go to the bathroom,
Mm-hmm.
in that startle response, my body does one of two things. Either my round muscle that keeps that urine in clenches,
Right.
or it does the opposite, it releases.
Right.
And then I maybe even cause you to have an accident.
Mm.
So this idea that I can set you up for success, that's care partnering. But care partnering doesn't come just because I care. It comes because I choose, with my healthy brain, to learn something different, to learn the ways in which dementia affects your brain and your body, as well as my own.
Right.
And that's where TIPA's approach, the positive approach to care, in just one little example, breaks down how we interact with individuals in the world around us to set both of us up for success.
That is so much what you just said.
It's a lot to
It's a
unpack.
lot. It just opened like a part of my brain right there. It was really good, Dr. Beth, how you unpacked it, how you opened up like a whole new perspective. And especially when you said it's either a social vision or a task vision.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, because when you look at a person, I mean, being somebody normal in that sense, you never think about not having the ability to do lots of things concurrently. So the moment when you said that, it was like, okay, now I get it, right? Because you are only able to do one thing at a time. However, that one thing could be a task or interaction, or it could be something that you engage or try to build a connection.
Yeah.
Right. And then also about the multiple things that you just said. When we're interacting, we don't really think about gestures or language, or, we just want to have a conversation.
We do it from our cerebellum.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yes.
So when we're interacting with an individual with dementia, we're more mindful, right? And we're more careful. And it also comes from a place of empathy and compassion, right? And love. Although you said, doesn't necessarily mean care, but that's what it is.
You've got to start with a reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece here that we miss when we see someone else as less than.
Right.
It's either this place of pity,
correct,
and nobody wants to be pitied.
Right.
No one. What we also are kind of considering is maybe I don't even have the right to empower you.
Okay.
That in fact, this idea of getting your permission repeatedly, constantly, is part of this idea that we're actually interacting, and we need to accept the fact that we're interacting with people who have been made less than, not because of their disease, not because of a dying brain, but because we took their power. And so what right do I have to give you your power back? And it's not to say that the word empowerment and empowering practices aren't wonderful. It's just a moment to consider the language and where are we starting from?
Right.
At what point did I say to my mother, you are now less than. I am now changing my life to come and take care of you.
Yeah.
And anyone that I have seen, including my friend here, Sharifa in Malaysia, what she and her mother give to each other in that care partnering role,
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And isn't that the point of life?
It is.
Having purpose and meaning for all individuals
Yep.
and having a reason to live.
Yes.
Because we know by diagnostic category, if I no longer have purpose and meaning in life, I actually can will myself to death.
Right.
And it's one of the diagnostic features of major depressive disorder.
It is.
So these are the basic needs of life. And we know those basic needs. So we can talk about those because it may be something that even if you're listening to this and you got curious and the dementia isn't a part of your world, it really comes down to meeting those basic needs and how we help and figure out what they are for each other.
And I think the other thing that I missed as I was explaining is hope. There's a lot of hope in that story right there.
Yeah. There's a lot of hope.
There's a lot of hope.
There's hope in the idea, isn't there, that, well, I mean, for us, I think there's some piece that in dementia, for many people, dementia is actually not some terminal illness that's going to happen in the next 2 years. They are terminal illnesses, but they're talking 10, 20, potentially even 30 years of life. And I could say that's a long time to just be dying.
Right.
So I think the hope comes from this idea that with this approach, with this place of respect and autonomy and my obligation as a care partner to repeatedly get your permission, and I have the skills to do that. I'm taught how to do that. That the hope is that we can both grow as human beings together, even if one of our brains is dying.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I also like the part where you said, we don't want to take the power from them. Right? And with care partnering, we're both equal. Right, we're on tap. We're not on top.
Can only provide 50%.
Right, exactly. Awesome. Okay, so moving on a little bit more. What about misconceptions?
Yeah, of dementia or something else. Yeah, so they're. I mean, the big one that pops to mind immediately is this idea that the minute I get dementia, I can no longer decide for myself.
Yeah.
So there's two types of people, and it's obviously a continuum. Everything is a continuum. Yeah. But there's two types of people in this world. Those people who are safety seekers and those people who are risk takers. Right. Those people that find purpose and meaning and sometimes joy and pleasure in doing things that are risky. I will fly across the country and maybe with just some aspirin and some, water purifiers, I'll go to some village out there just to be able to interact and learn from people. And other folks, they find much more pleasure and meaning in places of safety. Yeah. That in fact, they're seeking something that's familiar, that's much more functional for them. But the funny thing is that for familiar and functional, you can actually find that no matter who you are. But the minute I get dementia, our job, we presume as caregivers that it is our right and our obligation to only seek safety for you. And it comes from a place of then, even if I am a risk taker, I will no longer take a risk for you. You are my loved one, and that is too risky for me. So we can actually sort of flip-flop in that moment. And then everything I do to you becomes my job is to keep you safe. Right. So I think of folks who, for example, one of the core team members, person living with dementia that I know, he's always been a risk taker. And in fact, some of that risk-taking behavior, unfortunately, due to traumatic brain injury, led to the progressive illness that he's got, CTE. And this is one, pugilistic is an old term for it. So it's where repeated concussions happen to eventually something happens in the brain that triggers a progressive neurodegenerative response. So for him, he actually continues to do boxing. And he works out. And this idea that, yes, his brain is at higher risk. Absolutely. Right. But what right do I have for him to say your exercise now must involve a stationary bike? It's absurd. Okay. So the minute I get this diagnosis that I am the one that's making all the decisions, we've got to figure out how we meet both of our needs. And that may be I was the safety-seeking daughter who's now deemed to be in charge of your care for my risk-taking mother. Ooh, we're going to take a lot of deep breaths and figure out how it is we both get our needs met.
Could it also be you can still do boxing, but maybe in a safer way? Now, how does that work?
And that's where I think the care partnering comes in. Right. So knowing that, in fact, if my father with brain change, he's had a couple of concussions now, he also has a vascular history, that chances are he's at higher risk of getting dementia. Well, he also is an avid skier.
Oh my God.
Now, he does wear a helmet. He will do things. He's not stupid.
Right.
Well, the reality is that we got to figure out at what point We say, ooh, wow, maybe skiing is a little bit too scary of a sport for my mom.
Ah, okay.
So therein where the open communication comes from.
Okay, got it.
And the reality is that if my mom's brain isn't changing, and the only pleasure, the only place that my dad will see pleasure in life, which it doesn't, thank goodness, is by continuing to ski. At some point, my mom then would need the support to sit down with somebody to help her do what is the biggest skill that we learn as adults, which is the art of letting go. What might I have to let go?
Yeah.
Because if I don't let it go and I hold too tight to my husband not being able to ski, how much pain am I going to cause him? What do I really want in this relationship?
Right. That's so much, though. I mean, everything that you just said from the TIPA approach, this is something that can be implemented across.
Oh.
In everything.
Regardless, I use it with my teenagers. I use it with my dog training.
Right.
I mean, it's another brain. It's much simpler, but yeah, the same way that we will respect a large animal by getting into its space. No one with any experience at all of large animals, or even just the size alone, will walk up to a horse and lay their hands on it.
Exactly.
Well, why? Why is that? Why wouldn't anyone do that? Why would you not do that?
They will do something to me.
It's a big animal.
Yeah, it's a big animal.
I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
Well, that is some of the essence of this neurological occupational approach. That in fact, when I approach you, that I can get permission in each step of the way. So the way that we teach in Tipa's program, what she's figured out is actually a real basic skill that any one of us can try with anything with a brain.
Right.
That in fact, I walk up to you and I stop. Pause at the edge of personal space. Right. And we've all spent the last 4 or 5 years knowing very clearly what is the edge of personal space with COVID. 6 feet, or was it 3 meters?
3 meters.
Okay. 3 meters is actually the edge from public into personal.
Right.
And if I was to stand it, you can judge this the same way we did when we were learning what 3 meters was, is by holding out your hand. And if you can just barely touch fingertips, you're on the edge of someone's personal space. Right. That if you pause and you look, you can actually ask with no words permission. But we say, well, you don't have to use just vision. You can actually use an auditory.
Right.
So we give a visual cue. We walk up to personal space and we put our hand by our face, stationary. I'm not looking to do this big wave and get distraction. I'm hoping you can get the attention with my hand and actually look to my face. And I can then say your name.
Right.
At that point, when you look and I get visual contact, or at least you make motions toward it, I can slowly extend my hand as an ask.
Right.
And then in fact, I then shake.
Right.
But then if we just shake, where do we move to? If I just take a we know those creepy people that hold on too long.
I know.
Yeah. We sense these things in our cerebellum, a part of our brain that does things automatically because of learning and skill we've built over time. So there's a place in which we go from here. So in care partnering, I now would like to get a little closer. I'd like permission to touch, to provide comfort, and maybe even to provide care with you on your body.
Correct.
Well, when I was growing up, no one was allowed to touch my body unless we got permission. And I'm thinking that's a similar culture here. That in fact, when my husband and I were dating, we first held hands before we did anything else. That only when he got full permission after quite a long time that he was allowed to touch other parts of me. But even then, it's a lot of permission. And from here, we move to a hand clasp, hand underhand, as Tipa calls it. And from this is a comforting place where each one of us has 50% of this hold. I can't stay here if you don't want to. That each one of us can let go. But we also can give each other clues. That if I move too fast and get into your intimate space, or that place in which we're close enough to touch comfortably, that I can actually touch your torso. That's the place in which I've got to get a clue. We've got to be connected on a neurological basis. If your brain or my brain is changing, I might miss the visual cues you're giving me. That momentary hesitation where I've gone too fast. That if we're connected, we can get a lot more clues. You don't even have to tell me anymore as your language changes. Show me with your eyes. You can actually show me with how you move and touch. There's a freeze moment. There's a moment of stiffness. It's an amygdala response. It's a tiny one sometimes, but it can be big. Where your brain says, ooh, alert, alert. That part of your brain that is our safety awareness part. And It's also our emergency responder.
Right.
It's the fright or the flight. Or the hide, or actually the seek. Oh, hey, listen, can help me. I need some help. Safety seeker to find connection.
Right.
That part of our brain gives signals constantly. It's always alert and aware.
Right.
That even at the very end of the disease, when tissue is in other parts of the brain may be completely missing, that amygdala is there. And it gives us clues that are the person. And they'll tell us in subtle ways that are easy to train if you're willing to learn. And we can get clues about, am I going too fast? Are you understanding what I hope to do with you? And that's where we see these little videos online where someone is singing and mom slowly opens her eyes and turns to someone and says, hey. And there's that moment of recognition.
I know you.
I know you.
Yeah.
I may not know who you are,
Right.
but I know how you make me feel, and I know how I feel about you.
Yeah.
And that's the point of a relationship.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was beautiful. Again. And that's so powerful.
You can be.
Thank you. Okay, I think we should take a break.
Okay.
And we'll be right back in Real Conversations with Anita.
Beth, it has been a lovely conversation. I
Yours
learned
were.
so much. I wish you could stay here longer so that we can be trained as well
Well,
in future.
right, and this is the first step.
It is the first
And
step.
your willingness to branch out and recognize that brain change, no matter what is the cause,
Yeah.
is happening for all of us, whether
is.
it's stress or distress or if it's a mental illness or addiction disorder or dementia, like we're talking about today.
Correct.
You're right. There's actually things that we can do to get every one of our needs met and
Yeah.
live life to the fullest.
Right.
Truly.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Beth. Thank you. I want to give a shout out to Sharifah Tahir though, because she was the one that connected us. And she's such an extraordinary individual. She has done so much caring for and providing so much awareness on dementia.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Sharifah Tahir, if you're listening. Awesome. Okay, now maybe Beth for our last segment, which I hope doesn't end, but it must. What are some key takeaways for all of us, those that are listening, our viewers? How would you summarize this discussion today, and what would you want to share with them as a key takeaway that we can use it and implement and collectively do better?
That's a great question. I think the thing that I've learned from Sharifa is that each one of us, no matter who I'm interacting with in the world, comes with a lived experience. And that means you have done something. You're alive on this planet. You've done something successful to meet your needs. And from there is a basis. What I think happens with brains that are stressed, whether it's bereavement for loss of what you expected in retirement or in life, or changes that are made, or a disease process like dementia.
Or loss of identity, right?
Oh, loss of identity. There's so many things that really just cloud our thinking.
Yeah.
That it's harder at that moment, I think, to see what is possible.
Yeah.
And that the only way that I can get to see what is possible is if I am able to take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And across the world, different cultures take deep breaths in different ways. And when I was growing up, it was simply something you were taught from your mother, that you pause, you take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Or as in, an old Disney movie was Thumper, the bunny repeating his mother's words, if I can't say nothing nice, don't say nothing at all.
Yeah.
It's a pause.
Yeah.
But what I've also learned from Sharifa is that spirituality, and that this idea that I can use the ebb and flow in the day to actively choose to take a pause in prayer, in moments of peace, or even sitting in traffic. That if I breathe, I might be able to figure out what are 2 things that went well today.
Yeah.
And what's one thing I want to either do more of or try differently.
Yeah.
So one of the things that this message, I hope, brings is the right to say to yourself, what have I done today that's worked? And if we're able to do that, it's hard.
Yeah.
And it may simply be, I got up and I went to the bathroom.
Yeah.
That may be the one thing you're able to latch onto. That's something that is self-care.
Yeah.
That's a necessity of life.
It is.
And then from there, you might be able to think, okay, maybe what's the next thing?
Mm-hmm.
And Sharifa has been able to provide that for people in Malaysia.
Yeah.
Care partners that are so isolated, people living with dementia that are so alone
Yeah.
that they don't even know yet that there's an entire peer support network out there of individuals who are hopefully an internet connection away.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, what she's looking to do is build that network even in rural areas where connectivity isn't as easy electronically,
Right.
but it's there person to person.
Right.
That there's someone out there that has some perspective and can help you see what it is that you're doing well.
Yeah.
Because if you're able to do that, the resources out there are growing.
Yeah.
And they're growing not just in English, but they're growing in a variety of languages.
Mm-hmm.
That the positive approach to care can help you break down and figure out what I might be able to try.
Yeah.
But it really does start with what's been happening already. What's 2 things that went well
Mm-hmm.
and 1 thing you want to try.
Right.
Powerful.
Powerful. And the possibility of doing things differently, like what you said, and also having that knowledge that we don't know everything. And so there could be potentially better ways of doing things.
How can we possibly know everything?
That's so
Truly.
awesome. And I think it's so mind-blowing at the same time, Beth, that as you're speaking, there's so many things running in my brain and my thoughts right now. And one of the things is in our work, we do outreach program with the homeless folks, our homeless friends. And when someone is homeless on the streets for a very long time, they become very different. And because of so many factors, right?
Yeah.
And now listening to you and every possibility that you just shared gives us now a tool for us to better approach our friends that are homeless on the streets.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the safety factor alone,
Right.
the function of someone who's been living on the street is a level of skill of alertness that I can't even fathom. And so this idea that if I approach another human being, especially someone who I'm pretty sure by looking around, getting the visual cues and taking them in, it becomes an assessment, but not in this clinical, cold way that I'm assessing you, but I'm assessing how it is we might be able to get closer, get permission, and then get connected.
Right.
Because I think the 2 of us together can do more than I can do alone or than you can do alone.
Right.
That's the power of this approach.
Right.
And those are available in videos and little snippets and training that we can do. And Sharifa will be providing here in Malaysia.
Yeah. Awesome. We look forward to that. Now, Beth, the last question is, you've said a lot, and everything that you said is extremely, it's inspiring and empowering at the same time. But what would you say is a message of hope from you to people who are living with dementia, people living with mental health challenges, people who are caring or care partners to people living with dementia, and also people with mental health challenges? What is your message of hope? Everything that you shared, there's a lot of hope.
Yeah.
But maybe from you to them.
I think that it's like many diseases and many conditions, it becomes isolating. And what's even scarier is this difference between expectations, that I have an expectation that if I go to a healthcare provider and they do know what I have, that they'll then know what to do with it. And we forget that even our physicians, they're only human.
Yeah.
That in fact, they've studied really, really hard to help diagnose you. And then they've been taught to treat you.
Right.
And then they've been given this information that they recognize that I can't do anything to treat you.
Yeah.
And how disempowering that must feel. But doctors aren't the ones necessarily that are going to be the ones that help you live life. I go to a doctor when I need help, when I need a checkup to see, am I in the right direction health-wise? And maybe some ways in which I could help fix the things that are not working as well.
Right.
But how much time do I get with that provider? That the idea of living life, that's on me. But now when my ability to live my life is changing, the hope that we may be able to offer is that there is something beyond the doctor's office, and that many of our physicians are just, their hands are tied, and the only thing they have to offer is a pill that for most people out there isn't going to make a difference.
Right.
There's a small percentage of people that some medications can help a little.
Yeah.
But we still know that it's not going to change the progression necessarily of these diseases, or much less the outcome. But there is a community of therapists, of people with lived experience, of peer providers, of peer support, and care partners out in the world that can build a community to help every one of us build lives. And some of my best friends, like I said, are living with dementia. And I have friends that have gotten married after getting a dementia diagnosis. I have people that have started whole new careers and businesses after getting a dementia diagnosis. That no matter how long we have on this earth, and not a single person out there knows how much longer they have on this earth, those friends of mine who are living with dementia have been told a truth that theirs might be shorter than they expected.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that once you find that support and you do get the treatment that you need for this bereavement period, so it doesn't develop into depression, that there are things we can do to help each other live life pretty well with dementia.
And lead quality of life.
Truly.
Lead quality lives. Thank you very much, Beth, for sharing all that you just did. I think it was extremely insightful. I think now we've got more work to do for us at MIASA. I think you just opened up a whole new world for us, and we really look forward to it. And we wish you all the best. Please continue doing this work or this passion that you have. And, I wish Dr. Tipa Snow was here as well.
Well, we'll have to see if we can get her on. At the very least, linking our social media and finding each other on social media has been just invaluable. And for the work you all do, truly this idea of beating down stigma and recognize that every person on this planet has power and has purpose and meaning.
Thank you, Beth. That means a lot. Thank you so much. All right, that's it, folks. With Dr. Beth Nolan, Director of Research and Policy, Speaker Mentor for Positive Approach to Dementia Care. I hope and I know that you guys found this really beneficial. Do share this across, and we will see you on Wednesday via Spotify and YouTube, MIASA Malaysia, only on Real Conversations with Anita. See you guys next time. This is Real Conversations with Anita, a mental health podcast brought to you by Iltizam by Ikunas and MIASA Malaysia.